Hello, Jeremy. Welcome to Beirut. We're so glad to have you here at MUBS.
Thank you, Lamia.
First things first, can you tell us more about yourself and what drew you first to Latin and global history, Latin America history?
Sure. First of all, it's always wonderful to be back in Beirut. It's a beautiful city, a beautiful country. I wish I spoke Arabic. I need a tutor. And it's wonderful to have the opportunity to meet colleagues and students at MUBS, which has been such an important partner for the Global History Lab over the years. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. So I'm originally Canadian, and I got interested in Latin American global history as a student, having wonderful professors when I was an undergraduate. And then moved to the UK to do all my graduate work. And that really expanded my horizons and got me thinking, in a sense, about the wider global context for phenomena. I was interested in economic development, why some societies prosper and other societies struggle, and felt that in order to understand that, I needed a broader global perspective. Yeah, and at the same time, I think other perspectives, local perspectives and experiences are very important, but what societies can do and can't do are very shaped by the conditions around them.
The context.
Yeah, exactly. So understanding how those affected social opportunities over time was really the driver for me.
That's nice. So, what do you think was the common things between these multiple societies that you got to experience or at least see their conditions?
Well, so a couple of things always interested me. One, and this is why I've become more and more interested in Lebanese history. Yes, which I'm really just starting to learn more. But it's the condition of being, let's say, parts of a world system from, this is a difficult term, but from the margins. When you are, I think when I live in Britain now, and I've lived for many years in the United States before that, I think Americans, and less so now British, but certainly Americans have one way of looking at the world. Which makes a lot of assumptions about how the world works. And I was always interested in what this very same world looked like from the point of view of someone in a society that was much more dependent on external forces, that had much less sovereignty, and struggled with underdevelopment and democracy and peace. So those were all, which I think are more normal conditions of societies rather than the exceptions that you see, at least until relatively recently, in the United States, which is breaking down. So I was always interested in that. How do societies construct themselves without assuming that they had all the resources and entitlements that a privileged society like the United States had?
Yes, I see. So, what's the most common thing that you saw between all these societies?
Well, I never cease to be amazed at, in a sense, the kind of commitments and energy that people bring to the effort to try to improve the lives of themselves and those around them. Now, there is a challenge to that because in what are called low trust environments, people reduce the size of the community that they want to support around them. So in high risk, low trust environments, one thing we know historically, and the data confirm this, those are the kinds of societies where people work very hard towards personal gain and family gain, or tribal gain or community gain. In higher resource threshold societies and when there's more socialized trust, then people can commit themselves to a wider network of support because you have the trust systems to in a sense, to reward your effort. So what I am always impressed is people have an enormous amount of commitment to social change and improving their environments. The challenge always in a place like Lebanon or Argentina, where I lived for many years, is how to get the spillover effects from all that social energy. Americans take all that for granted. I mean, and I'm always having to explain to my American students what you think is normal is not, and you need to understand that.
So can we say that it's like the sense of patriotism?
Yes. Patriotism is one expression of that. Civic mindedness is another expression. So even if the nation isn't, the civic community around you might be another way of thinking collectively, beyond the kinship tribal systems that you need to support you, because no man is an island, right? And so you need something collective to support you, but the degree of trust and resources will determine how far out what are called the multiplier effects of your commitments can go. And patriotism is one driver of that.
I see. So, Jeremy, if you look back at your career, what was the moment that changed how you see the role of historians in the world?
Tough question.
Take your time.
Yeah, historians. I guess I always was interested in history. So it's a hard question because as a kid, I think of all of the books I would go to the library and pull down. It was books. Really, I was interested in military history. So I read Winston Churchill's diaries, I think, when I was like 13 years old. So I was always, I think, interested in history. I think that the turning point, though, because my undergraduate studies, and this is for all the undergraduates out there who might be listening to this, and I think, as I understand it from your own career trajectory, Lamia, it's not always linear. You don't always, when you're 18 or 19 years old, where you start in one place doesn't have to be the commitment for when you're 35 years old. And I started out, I did my undergraduate studies in economics and political science, not in history. But I realized in taking university courses with professors that most people's big explanations for why some societies succeed and other societies are in a chronic state of crisis, they rely on narratives. And in that sense, history is the model for theories about success or failure, triumph or tragedy, democracy or dictatorship. People go back to history all the time and they tell stories, and we can talk maybe more about narration and how narrative mobilizes people to do things or inhibits people sometimes too. You can get into things called narrative traps.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is it the same thing as history is repeating itself?
That is one narrative, right? That would be one way of telling the story of you're caught in a spiral, right, that you cannot get out of. And I think certain Lebanese, from my conversations with my friends and colleagues here, that is one form of storytelling in Lebanon. We are in a trap, right? Yes, and recycling the same patterns that we can't get out of. Latin Americans have a familiar way of telling stories about themselves also. And we can, again, talk more about that. But I got very interested in how that functions. So I moved from economics to history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nice shift. So as part of the virtual exchange program, and since you're the director of the Global History Lab, so how do you think global history will help students have some sense of nationalism or globalization today? How do you think this will affect them?
Well, different students have different experiences of this. I mean, I think we used to think when we said global that it's all the same. We all share a similar repertoire. I think there's an element of truth to that, that all young people are young. All young people rely on social media, that there are things they share in common. They like to dance, at least lots of them do. There are traits that...
Different type of music also.
Yeah, that they share. On the other hand, that they have, what they learn to some extent depends on where they're learning from. And this is why the lab, and this is why students who are coming into the Global History Lab through MUBS are so important. It's not just that they learn something about the world, and they will learn something about the Ottoman Empire and Chinese expansion or the crisis of China in the 19th century and why China's coming back now, and what those large patterns are over time. But it is very important that the Lebanese students who go into this program via MUBS locate their own experiences within this wider context and talk about it with their students on the platform from Germany, from the United States, from India, from Spain, and exchange views. This is what is really, it's a soft skill, but it's what's going to get some of our collective problems solved, is ability for people to be more empathetic.
Yes, and accepting of others' experience.
Well, accepting is one way. I mean, that would be great but I
if we
don't
reach
have
this
those
level,
expectations.
yes.
But it's more at least understanding where the other perspective, because you may not agree with the other,
but at least you have
need
to respect it.
Yeah,
Yes.
Where is that story coming from? At least I understand. Wars often start not just because one side doesn't see the other side as valid, but they feel that the other side's story is devalidating of their own. And so I think
which is not the case.
What's that?
Which is not the case, because you can have a different experience than mine, and I still have
Right.
to just accept the fact that you had a different experience.
Right. And to understand where that experience comes from, why you have that story, even if it's not yours, and even if you don't believe it yourself. So it's the conditions of a kind of cosmopolitan learning space. And in that sense, the Lebanese students have a lot to teach the German and the French and the American students. So that learning goes all ways.
Yes, true. So do you think that history is used as a tool for dialogue, or more like for a division under the current climate, global climate?
So, Lamia, it's going to sound maybe to some of the students like I'm not really answering the question, but the answer is both. That the stories can be sources of mutual understanding, but they are also, as they say, weaponized. And very often, stories of grievance and resentment and fear and jealousy about the other side, let's say the stranger over there on the other side of the border, can get whipped up by what are called narrative entrepreneurs, the people who generate stories. We would now call them conspiracy stories, right, about the enemy. And so the very same narrative can be used to create greater distance and animosity.
It's like propaganda, you mean?
Yes. But actually, I would not use the word propaganda as much as, I mean, some of it is just naked propaganda. Propaganda as the instrument of the state to propagate a view of the other. That's why I prefer to call them kind of repertoires or narratives that people can use for different purposes. And what we try to do in the lab and what we do with the MUBS students is for people to understand what are the properties of those narratives, so you can be more critical and open-minded about when someone is making something up. Yeah, yes. That you know something as a historian. And one easy step is to say, how do you know what you know? Like, what's your source? Let's just talk about that.
True, totally. So how do you, now you know that we live in the age of AI.
Yep.
How do you see that AI is shaping or actually changing the way history is taught and researched nowadays?
You know, I don't have a very good answer to this question. I don't know. We are very early on in this. We are in, so one thing we do know about the history of technology is at the beginnings of the cycle of a technological disruption, we think we know what's happening and we really don't. And we think we know what's happening because we need to develop tools to make sense of what we're doing, but we live in what's called a fog, and a kind of mist. And I think we're still in the mist. I tend to think of AI as a very fancy tool more than anything else. I don't know how much it's going to change. I think when ChatGPT and OpenAI first started out, everybody thought this is going to revolutionize everything. And I think now the feeling is probably not. And so we're still trying to figure out. It's clear it's going to change things. I think we have to be open-minded and experimental and not prejudicial, but we have to be critical at the same time if we're going to make the best use of this very fancy tool.
So Jeremy, can you tell us more about the Global History Lab?
Sure. So the lab started as an experiment because I noticed, this is when I was a professor at Princeton, that a lot of my students were taking notes on their laptops. So I would give classes and lectures, and there would be 100 students in the audience, and they would all have their laptops open, and they would be taking notes, which was fine. And then I noticed when a colleague of mine was up at the front giving the lecture, and I was in the back watching, and all the screens, I could see all the student screens that had all the sports and Amazon, and they were shopping and they were chatting with their girlfriends and their boyfriends, and they weren't really paying any attention to the professor. And I thought, oh my God, the ecosystem changed when Wi-Fi arrived in the classroom. That was one, and I realized we got to get inside the screen. The other was I was then the chief international officer at Princeton University, which meant that I was in charge of doing partnerships with universities around the world and blah, blah, blah. And I kept thinking, I'm signing all these things and realizing, why don't we internationalize the one thing we all have in common, whether it's in Beirut or Princeton or Cambridge or Moscow? We teach these things called courses. So why not blow up the course? So we started initially with a partner called Coursera, where I started to do my lectures on the screen. So students, I was there, and then we started to experiment doing interactive work with students around the world through what's called a MOOC, a massive open online course. And then we realized, in the first year that I taught it, I had 95,000 students. Wow. And it was amazing. I mean, it was at the time of the first round of protests in Hong Kong, and we had a whole group of students in Hong Kong, the Scottish separation referendum. I don't know if you remember any of this. But students could talk together about their global experiences. Eventually, I realized I did not want to do it as an open course. It was out of control. I could not manage the numbers of students. And now what we run the Global History Lab as a closed network course with MUBS, with students in Berlin, with students in Athens, students in Rome, Paris, Nigeria, in Iraq, in various 22 partners around the world that we've specially chosen to create a bounded, very cosmopolitan international group of students. There are about 400 students specially chosen who engage in every week readings and lectures and conversations with each other. So that's what the lab essentially does, and then there are a set of courses, and that gives them at the very end a research opportunity to do local research in a global context.
Very nice idea, actually, and it's a great experience that MUBS as a partner with such an initiative. So if you could leave students with one guiding question throughout their education, what would it be? Just one? You can have two. You can pick two.
I mean, I think, you know, it would be hard to have one. I would say try things out.
Experience things.
Yeah, challenge yourself. You know, especially if you're young, do it while you're young. As my uncle used to always tell me, do it while you still can. Yeah, take risks. Do something that's a little bit out of the ordinary. Those risks are going to yield higher, I'm going to sound like an economist here, they will yield higher returns than the low-risk adventures. So try courses. The other is, I'm talking to a wonderful professor at MUBS. The students should get to know their professors. The thing that is always, so this is my second piece of advice, and it's the thing that has always upset me when I talk to students who are just graduating. When they graduate, they're having a conversation with me, and they're getting emotional very often because they're realizing it's the end of their 4 or 5 years of study, and only now are they having a conversation with the professor. It never
outside the classroom.
Yes, it never occurred to them to go to the office hours to say, could I talk to you about my career?
The peak and ends.
Yes. And often those informal conversations with professors are the ones that make big differences. Which isn't to say the classroom isn't relevant. It's the basis. But I would say get to know your professors.
Very valuable advice. Thank you. So now we're closing with something light and funny. Okay. So if you had to teach a full history course using only street food as examples, which country would you choose?
6. Which countries would I choose if I pulled together?
Yes. Or which country you think should win?
Each one contributes its own really valuable perspective. I'll tell you an experience I had. And it was actually right here in Lebanon. It was not with MUBS. It was very, very early on. It was with an NGO called Jasur. In my very first or second year doing this program, Jasur is a Syrian NGO, works with Syrian refugees. There's a base of Jasur in Lebanon. And a group of students doing the course, they were studying the First World War and the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, which is what produced, out of which came Lebanon, and also Syria. And I gave a lecture about the origins of the nation states in the Levant, in the Middle East, and blah, 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 blah. Professor Adelman goes for 50 minutes talking about all of this, and the students wrote to me and said, but Professor Adelman, you never once mentioned something called the Sykes-Picot Treaty. Test to the students. Look it up. Google Sykes-Picot Treaty, because I realized I hadn't talked about it. But it was the treaty that the British and the French, a secret treaty that the British, that you might all take for granted. But even Professor Adelman at Princeton University didn't think it was important enough to include. And so the Syrian student said, I think you need to include this. And I said, okay. I tell you what, you do a special report for all the hundreds of students in the course from around the world on why the Sykes-Picot Treaty was so important for world history. And so they did it. In 2 weeks, they put together a report. It was like a 5-page report. They put it online, all the students around the world. And at the end of the course, my Princeton students, I said, in the final examination, you have a choice to write essays about 10 different subjects. The choice from 10, you have to choose 2 of them. All my Princeton students chose Sykes-Picot because they had learned from these Syrian refugees
that it was a turning point.
That I didn't do it. It was the students who did it.
But you taught them something. They constructed their own knowledge.
I gave them voice.
Yes, they constructed also their own knowledge
by
looking it up.
Yes, and they knew what a story would be, and they could put it in global context. Yes, okay, you're being very nice to me. No. What I'm saying is, yes, you're absolutely right that was a context that gave them this capacity, but they provided the content. So I like to think that everybody has content to provide for the global conversation.
Thank you again, Jeremy, for this lovely conversation. And lastly, I just want to reflect on this beautiful experience that you had with MUBS. Yeah. Can you tell us more, to close this podcast?
Absolutely. I mean, I've always appreciated the voice that the MUBS students bring to the conversation. For a variety of reasons. I mean, one is obviously the high quality of the students themselves and the importance of their voice. I would say what I think maybe even that they can't appreciate because they can't see what they look like or sound like from the outside. But what I can say about MUBS students is that from the point of view of students in Germany or Italy or Spain or the United States, they will go through their whole lives without listening to a Lebanese counterpart. In fact, I think they spend most of their lives not realizing that there are also students in public health and education in Lebanon. And it blows their minds. So that a student from Lebanon can have a similar idea or a challenging idea to them. It's very important that the rest of the world hear from MUBS students in ways I think it's impossible to really appreciate. So this is a message from the outside. Join, get engaged, speak, add your voices to the global conversation.
Totally. Thank you again, and it was a lovely discussion. I hope you enjoyed it.
I did. Thank you, Lav.
Thank you.
Yes.